The Philadelphia 76ers may have received the news that they've been waiting on, as one team around the NBA appears on the brink of blowing up already in this NBA season. I'm here to break down why that could be the difference in a James Harden trade, how much optimism we should have for something taking form, and the overall situation which is going down with the Chicago Bulls. Now, before I dive fully into it, I do want to make sure you guys are hitting that subscribe button. That at this point in time, 81.8% of you guys have not subscribed to the channel. I do very much appreciate the 18.2% of you that have, but I want to keep this Sixers Digest family growing, that we have the actual basketball to begin breaking down. The Sixers are tipping off tonight. At this point in time, I'm recording this video before the first game. I have plenty of takes on that and everything else once it goes down, but I cannot wait to get started. I want each and every one of you along for the ride. Now let's talk about the bigger picture issue. We know the James Harden situation has kind of been the cloud looming over the optimism of the Sixers throughout this offseason, and there is a team that may be interested. Not necessarily that they've shown interested in James Harden, but I do think it is very clear that the Chicago Bulls need a change. Now, to dive fully into it, we have a report from NBA Central here that the Chicago Bulls had a players-only meeting after last night's loss versus OKC. It is only the first game of the season. For more clarity on this, Billy Donovan says that when he walked into the Bulls locker room, players were already in heated conversations. He asked if they wanted him to leave to handle the conflict. The players said yes, so he did. Donovan emphasized that embracing conflict is the key to this year's roster. Now, for starters, it's crazy to be doing this after one game. That training camp just finished. This is a team that has some eyes on it coming into the year. The Bulls are in what I would like to consider basketball purgatory. And what I mean by that is they are not good enough to be a legitimate contender. That I do think they're a notable notch below teams like the Milwaukee Bucks, Boston Celtics, Philadelphia 76ers, even the Cleveland Cavaliers and teams like that. The New York Knicks I would even consider above the Bulls. They're not quite good enough for that upper echelon of teams, but they're also not bad enough to have a route to improve. That they're never going to be bad enough to have a significant draft pick to get an impact player. They're already pretty tight against the cap. It made zero sense to me why they re-signed Nikola Vucevic this summer, and Vucevic specifically got into a little altercation with Billy Donovan on the sideline of last night's game. That was kind of what I believe led to this, is there was very much a clear in front of cameras little heated argument, at least, that seemed to revolve around him not getting enough touches. I will say that Vucevic was very quiet in the second half and did not really have an opportunity to do much, that he did not get the ball on the post in the way that he seemed to desire. But what this means and why I think this is important is with the Clippers looking at things, as I mentioned, that they are in basketball purgatory. They're very much directionless as a franchise right now, which is the worst place to be. That choose a direction, choose a way to go, and for the Bulls, I do believe that is rebuilding. Why this is important to the Sixers is they need a market to be made for James Harden. This is especially crucial following the news that we got the Clippers putting the trade talks for James Harden on pause for the foreseeable future from Adrian Wojnarowski. So what that means is that the Sixers need another team to get involved to change things. That if the Clippers actually want James Harden, they cannot be cute and dance around. They have to step up to the plate and make the offer. The quickest way to accelerate that is to have another team of interest. Now, the two names that pop to mind when discussing the Chicago Bulls are these two players here. We have DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine. So I'll start with DeMar DeRozan here, 34 years old, 6'6", 220 pounds. This is obviously just from last night's game, so don't take these averages too heavily, but 20 points per game, 5 rebounds, 2.0 assists, shot 45% from the field. That's about right for DeMar DeRozan. I'm about to jump into their contracts in a second, which I think is very relevant in this conversation. But what DeMar is, he's a cold-blooded killer. That he is a guy that is a mid-range master, can get to his spots, and I do like his fit within the Sixers team. He is 34. He is on the older side, so that is a notch against him. But he is the type of player that I do think makes sense. I think from the Sixers' perspective, that their view has very much shifted at this point in time. You're not going to get this superstar flip for James Harden. That in a vacuum, James Harden is the better basketball player than DeMar DeRozan. But when you can make a possible swap like this and give Tyrese Maxey the keys to elevate his game, I think the real gamble is Tyrese Maxey is now the number 2 of the Sixers team. It's Joel Embiid at the number 1, Tyrese Maxey is the number 2, and they need to find what that number 3 is. Could it be a DeMar DeRozan? Maybe. Is there a little repetitiveness against guys like Tobias Harris? There's an argument for that as well. Now, the other guy to keep in mind is Zach LaVine, who's a little bit younger, 28 years old, coming off a fairly bad performance last night. So he's got 16 points last night, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, shot poorly from the field. I will dive into his stats as a whole in a second, but I do want to touch on the salary component, which is a very relevant piece. These are the two contracts that they have. Zach LaVine on a pretty monstrous max deal, a 5-year, $215 million deal, AAV of $43 million per year on average. He's getting paid $40 million this year. It'll be $43 million next year. about $46 million in 25-26. He has a player option for $48.9 million in 26-27, which one would assume he would accept, and then becomes an unrestricted free agent in 27-28. DeMar DeRozan, on the other hand, is on an expiring deal. He's making $28.6 million this year, and then will be a free agent at the conclusion of this season. Now, I'll start by saying I've spoke quite a bit about the grand plan of Daryl Morey to have this cap space, that a DeMar DeRozan type flip would grant the Sixers the flexibility to still have that type of money this summer and still is getting rid of the James Harden problem if there is a deal in place. However, I'm very much of the mindset of a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. How you feel about these players should directly dictate what you would prefer in a deal. I do think Zach LaVine is probably the better player at this point in his career, but I also think there's an argument to make that he's a little repetitive next to Tyrese Maxey. They're both guys that are pretty offense-first players that aren't going to lock up on the defensive end, that I think they're pretty not ball dominant is the wrong word, because James Harden's the most ball dominant out of any of these players that I'm comparing here. And to just dive fully into it from the Zach LaVine perspective, let's take a look at his stats here. So these are his stats throughout his career. He's coming off a season in which he played 77 games, which is the most he's played in several years. Injuries have been a concern with him, but he averaged 24.8 points per game last year, 4.2 assists, 4.5 rebounds. The three-point shooting, something I think is of note for his career, 38.3% on 5.8 attempts per game. He's gotten much better as a shooter over the course of his career. Shot 41.9% for a season on 8.2 attempts with the Bulls. That was in 2020, 2021. So that's pretty recent and pretty telling. He's done a nice job developing that. When he came out of UCLA, he was very much just a high-flying athlete, a dunk contest guy. We've seen these awesome flashes against Aaron Gordon in the greatest dunk contest ever and all these other moments, the highlights that he can produce. But he has turned himself into a relatively complete basketball, that he's grown as a passer. He's an effective rebounder. He's an okay defender. He's a better defender than James Harden. I'll put it that way, that he's passable on that side of the floor. Never a guy that I think is going to shine in that category, but I do think that is of note at the minimum. So these are realistic guys that I think are in the vicinity of a James Harden trade. Now, where I think the bridge and where the issue is I think if the Bulls are to look at this, and actually let me take a step back and talk about why I think James Harden could remotely be appealing to the Bulls, because we know that he comes with baggage. We know the situation, him holding out. Why that I think the LaVine for James Harden deal could potentially make sense. If the Bulls want to enter a rebuild, James Harden is on a one-year contract. That no matter what happens this year, no matter how messy it gets, that he will be a free agent at the conclusion of the season. If you want to get off the Zach LaVine money, that's trading away 4 years of his contract. You take in the 1 year of James Harden, and then you can start from scratch. That you let the DeMar DeRozan contract expire, you let the James Harden contract expire, and at least it's something new, that you're changing the vibes to this locker room. You give this team a fighting chance, because the Bulls are still going to be a playoff team if it is a James Harden, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, whoever else they want to rotate around. And just for the sake of looking at their team as a whole right now, let's take a look at the box score last night with the starters. That Patrick Williams, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, Kobe White, and Zach LaVine. And by the way, Kobe White, who I like, he's a fine player. I don't believe ready to be a number one point guard on a team. I do believe that they could use some point guard help, which is where James Harden could help in that direction. So I do think that there is a little bit of a match there. If you want to give this team something to buy into, the franchise a little bit of hope, and then in the long view that you are taking a stride towards the rebuild, that there are some nice young players that the Chicago Bulls franchise does. Patrick Williams has a ton of potential. Dalen Terry, one of my favorite players that I've loved him since his Arizona days, that he's sitting on their bench, and I believe he has a bright NBA future, that he has not quite untapped his potential yet. So there are pieces there that if the goal of the Chicago Bulls is to hit that reset button, it does make some sense to flip Zach LaVine for James Harden, let all that money come off the books this offseason, and then work from there. The issue that I see and the sticking point that I believe will come up if there are trade discussions, and I do think the situation is going to have to get a little bit worse in Chicago for there to be any type of material. I mean, as much as people seem on edge already in Chicago, we're still one game into the season. But this is what Daryl Morey is waiting to see, that what teams are self-destructing, which teams are getting desperate, what teams are overperforming, what teams are underperforming, and who needs to make a deal. James Harden, as much as he has his flaws, is likely the best player available on the market. The best player very clearly available on the market. So if a team wants to make a splash, make an impact, and kind of change the route of their season, going out and getting him is the best way to do that. So the Chicago Bulls are a team to monitor in that type of situation. Where I see the problem in this trade is I do think Morey's going to view it as I need a little extra stuff in addition to get Harden. And I think the Bulls are going to view it the opposite way. We're going to need to send Harden and some extra stuff to get this deal. So that is where I see a little bit of a bridge in this issue. But the bottom line is if you can walk away with a Zach LaVine or a DeMar DeRozan, that's a whole lot better position than the Sixers in. Because at this point in time, you're more or less getting that player for nothing because James Harden is not playing on this team at this moment. So any player that they're able to get back is an improvement over the 0 points, 0 assists, and 0 rebounds, which James Harden will produce in at least his first 2 games with the Sixers. So I do think the Bulls are a notable story to watch moving forward. I am excited that there is a little bit of self-destruction, and I'll say I felt like it going into the summer, that I do think they're an organization without a direction and could use to make a change. I'm surprised to see the vibes are that low this quickly, that they were a team that had some of these internal issues last year as well. Patrick Beverley, who is now on the Sixers, really elevated that team when he did join late in the season after he was traded by the Lakers and released by the Magic. He did sign in Chicago, which is his hometown. He really helped stabilize things in that franchise, and it's clear that they're spiking back up. So while the Bulls seemed to end on a high note last year, they seem to be just lacking a lot of leadership and guys that just don't seem to see things eye to eye. If it gets to the point where they need to make some significant changes, James Harden may be a guy that comes to the table. So this is a story to keep in mind. It will be very beneficial to the Sixers in the way of trading James Harden, whether it is genuine interest from the Bulls or just something to place a phone call, have discussions, and then all of a sudden the Clippers might need to get on their giddy up and make a more legitimate offer. Regardless, this is good news for the Sixers. I still think this is going to take several weeks to play out, but this is a storyline to monitor from here. Thank you guys for tuning in this video. I want to hear in the comments, who would you rather, or who would you be more likely to pull the trigger on a deal? Would it be a Zach LaVine deal or a DeMar DeRozan deal? Who excites you more as a potential piece of the Sixers? Let me know. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, ring the bell so you're not missing out on any content, and I will talk with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.